Never really wanted to use a gavel before, so. I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening. This is the public meeting regarding the proposed TIF 3 district. We do have a couple of people still coming in, just so we do have some seats available in here, but there also is, the video will be live streamed out in the lobby and also the conference room in front, so we do have available seating in that area too if you want to participate and not be in the room here this evening. So I do appreciate everybody's time to come out this evening to gain information on the proposed TIF district. This is a public meeting where we can advise you as far as where the village has, what steps the village has taken to date to get to this point, what the proposed TIF district is, and then also from that standpoint, what the next steps are going forward through this process. So just brief introductions for those that don't know. My name is Brian Simmons. I am the Director of Community Development for the Village of Cary. I've been with the Village of Cary here now for over 8 years on staff. To my left is members of our TIF consultant team with Ryan, is the name of the corporation. Brett Mickelson and Phil McKenna are representing Ryan Associates this evening. There'll be a portion of the presentation as we go forward here. To my right is our village attorney, Scott Euler with Kleinthorpe and Jenkins, and then the village administrator, Eric Morimoto, and our economic development specialist, Dan Gardner as well. So we'll all be participating in various points throughout the presentation this evening on what will be discussed. So a brief overview as far as the purpose of tonight's meeting. We're just to provide information regarding the proposed designation of a redevelopment project area, the preparation of a redevelopment plan for the proposed Central Cary tax increment financing district, which we are identifying as TIF district number 3, as the village has historically had 2 TIF districts prior to this time period. I just want to confirm or verify that tonight is not a public hearing, so there will be no formal action taking regarding the TIF district this evening. It's more to present what the proposed TIF area is, and also to help answer any questions and provide feedback as far as what you may have regarding the proposed TIF district. The Village of Cary has put information on our website regarding the TIF district. If you go to our website, villageofcary.com, there is an informational page on the front page where you can directly link to find information on what TIF is, and then also the history of TIF within the Village of Cary. There also is a ability for residents and organizations to register with the Village of Cary should you want to be informed of future steps that take place regarding the TIF district. There's an interested parties registry where you can fill out a form with our village clerk to obtain information should additional public hearings or meetings take place regarding this proposed TIF. Some background as far as the history for why the village is looking to implement a TIF district. The village in 2015 updated our comprehensive plan. It's a planning document that looks at long-term land use policies within the village for what the next 10 to 20 years type of development the village would like to see in the community. The village has had various comprehensive plans dating back to the 1960s that have been updated over time as development has occurred within the community and updates to see what current development trends would be. So the most recent update was performed back in 2015, and some of the guidance from that plan looked at ways that you can encourage within the downtown area some redevelopment or reinvestment within the core area, and TIF is one of the financing tools that's available to the community to fulfill that vision. And just for individuals that are walking in now, just if you don't want to stand for the meeting, we do have the meeting will be streamed in the front foyer and also a front conference room as well, if there may be seating still available in there, if you'd like to observe from that standpoint. Most recently, the village adopted a downtown Cary strategic plan back in 2021 that's similar to the comprehensive plan, although it had more of a focus on the downtown area. specifically looking at ways that the village could incorporate or encourage reinvestment or redevelopment in the downtown core, not specifically looking at the potential for redevelopment or sites that could see redevelopment, but also ways that we can encourage existing businesses to grow and maintain their presence in the downtown area to make it a vibrant area for people to come to and visit. So both of those documents looked at ways to had implementation plans within them, recommendations for the village to follow, and one of the ways to help try and finance those improvements would be through the use of TIF. A little background on the use of TIF in the village. Historically, the village has had TIFs districts in the past. This image shows the locations of those two TIFs. TIF district number 1.
Can you speak up, please? Turn your mic up or something. Thank
Sorry.
you.
TIF district number 1 was located on the eastern edge of the village from the ComEd right-of-way to the Fox River Grove, or the Fox River area. That TIF was created back in 1998 and was recently dissolved in 2021 as it reached its 23-year lifespan. TIF 2 is currently in existence and is in the downtown core. It's the block essentially surrounding the Veterans Acres Park. As part of this process, the village is looking to dissolve that TIF as the proposed TIF 3 will incorporate the area that TIF 2 is currently within. And this image here shows the location of the proposed TIF. The village focused on this area due to the age of the infrastructure that's in the area. For those that are familiar with the village, this area was part of the original 1893 corporate limits of the village. It incorporates the downtown area, but also portions of the village that have not seen a lot of reinvestment or redevelopment within them. Through the eligibility report that was analyzed, we looked at this area that the EAV in this area has lagged behind other areas of the village that have seen more growth within the equalized assessed valuation of their portion of the village. So this area is being proposed to have a TIF to help bring this area and back up from a standpoint of encouraging reinvestment within that area. This table kind of illustrates the size of the proposed TIF as how it would impact the existing taxing districts that govern this area. So for reference, the proposed TIF is about 253 parcels in size. That equates to less than 3% of all other taxing districts that have jurisdiction over this area, with the exception of the village of Cary. And also from an equalized assessed valuation, it encompasses less than 4% of the impacted taxing district's existing EAV. With the elimination of TIF 2, the taxing districts that currently are impacted by that district would be able to capture the additional growth that has occurred within that TIF since its creation back in 2006. And that would be additional to their existing EAVs for their future years. TIF 3 currently produces or generates about $2.6 million in property taxes to all of the taxing districts that have jurisdiction in that area. When the TIF is created, the taxing districts will still have access to those funds. It will not be taking any funds away from those districts, so the existing $2.6 million in taxes will still go to those taxing districts. What the TIF will do is capture any growth that occurs in that area, new growth or new increases in EAV that will generate towards a separate fund that can be utilized for development. So it would be new development that occurs in that area would help finance the TIF. From a comparison standpoint with other TIF districts in the county, this image shows the other 9 communities within McHenry County that have TIF districts and the proposed size of this district from both a parcel perspective and an equalized assessed value standpoint, and where it ranks with other communities in the county. So from a standpoint of the existing 9 communities, this TIF, if approved by the village, would be the 6th in size in the number of parcels from across the county, and also be the 5th in size for the percentage of EAV There are other communities, obviously in the county, that have more TIF districts. So the village currently has one active TIF. This would be the one TIF we would have going forward. Some other communities do have two or four TIFs from that standpoint. From this point here, I'll turn it over to our village attorney just to explain the reason for the meeting this evening and why we're having the meeting, and also to give information as far as who was notified for this meeting as well.
Thank you, Brian. As background, Brian initially mentioned that this is a public meeting, not a public hearing. The village board eventually will be convening a public hearing in the near future. I'll let you know when that is, what that schedule looks like. As Brian has already noted, this public meeting is required by our state TIF law because the proposed TIF project area for this TIF includes 75 or more inhabited residential units. And the future contemplated development in this TIF and under the TIF plan could result in the displacement of more than 10 inhabited residential units in the proposed TIF area. So while this TIF development plan could potentially result in the relocation of some residential units, which we understand may be a concern, the goal of the current TIF plan is to produce net positive housing in the TIF area. At this time, there are no specific plans for relocation of any residential units. I'm going to say that again. At this time, as the TIF plan is drafted, there are no specific plans identifying any residential unit that is intended to be displaced. It may, however, occur based on the next 23 years of this TIF relative to certain kinds of development that may come forward. So based on the possible displacement of 10 or more inhabited residential units, the proposed TIF project and plan documents include what is called a housing impact study. The preparation of a housing impact study under state law is to comply with the requirements of our state TIF Act to provide and plan ahead of time for potential housing dislocation if any need actually arises as a result of future development. There are no plans for that displacement at this point, but if it occurs, we are planning now for that potential future occurrence. The notice of tonight's hearing is provided for by our state TIF Act as well, and does require widespread notice to persons and entities in the village. We, the village, were required to send notice of this meeting to a number of potentially affected persons, businesses, entities. Those persons and parties include the taxing districts identified by statute that are impacted by this proposed TIF district, all taxpayers of record or persons in whose name the real estate taxes were last paid within the proposed TIF area, all residential addresses within the proposed TIF area, and all of the individuals and entities that are registered. I'm not sure there are any at this point. We have what is called a TIF Parties Interested Registry. If anyone is seeking to be advised of any activities that are proposed or planned for this TIF, they can register in writing with the village, and you will be directly provided ongoing information about the TIF activities. The village has been working with the professional TIF consultants with us here this evening is it Ryan Kane McKenna, or are we just using Ryan? Ryan Kane McKenna and Associates, regarding the eligibility report for this TIF, the TIF redevelopment plan itself, and the draft housing impact study that I just mentioned. Representatives from their firm are here this evening with us to share additional information regarding that eligibility report, the TIF redevelopment plan, and the housing impact study. So we turn it over to the TIF consultants for their presentation.
Sure.
And I'll turn this on so I can be heard. I'm Phil McKenna. Brett Michelson is with me. There's a lot of information, so I'm going to try and distill it down because we really want to get to your comments and questions all together. In this overview, there's three principal things that I want to emphasize. What is TIF? What is this thing all about? Why would the downtown TIF make any sense whatsoever to consider? And what's the process? What's the process that involves you and others? Go on to the next one. So TIF basically builds upon, as Brian alluded to, the comprehensive plan. So the village went through the process of adopting a comprehensive plan, then went further and adopted a downtown strategic plan. That set out the goals and objectives based upon residents' input, business input, of what the village wanted to see downtown. TIF is really a tool to carry out that vision. The next one. What happens with TIF is that properties pay the exact same amount of tax that they would pay whether they're in a TIF or outside of a TIF. Assessor comes out, values the property, says it's worth X. That X is multiplied by Y, the tax rate in effect, and that's what the business, the resident, the developer, whoever it may be, that's what they pay. The difference is that with a TIF district, by virtue of a public involvement and incentive, the thought is the value is going to increase. And if the value increases, then what's described here is the second bucket. The second bucket gets filled up. So the first bucket represents what we call the base revenues. That continues to go to all the taxing districts. The second bucket is the increment. It's the result of private investment that helps the downtown area, helps the businesses, helps the residents, and produces more taxes. So what we wind up with is an upward sloping curve. I'm colorblind, so you gotta excuse me if I miss the colors on this. But if you see the curve going up, you know, the ideal is that you have consistent growth. You don't always have that. We have ups and downs in our economy. But what you're looking for is really the difference, that the delta, if you will, between the horizontal line and up to whatever the diagonal line is moving forward. That differential is what represents the TIF increment. That's what's used to fund the public improvements. We go to the next slide. So what we do then is we take a look at the strategic plan, the comprehensive plan. We say, what are the issues that need to be addressed? In this particular case, and I'll tell you, it's not unusual in our experience in downtown, you have a lot of age. You have more than 50% of the buildings, I think it's closer to 80% of the buildings, that are more than 35 years of age or older. Not a good or bad. But obviously with age comes problems in terms of keeping things up. Infrastructure in particular, sometimes you get obsolescence with the structures. So you want a vibrant downtown. And you look up and down the Northwest Highway corridor, and you see what's happened to downtowns. Unfortunately, they've lost investments. What have communities done? They've reinvested and largely used the TIF pool. You look at Palatine, Des Plaines, Mount Prospect, Barrington, Fox River Grove. They've all looked to say, okay, we want to reinvest in our downtown. We want to see it grow. What's the tool out there? Years and years ago, there were federal funds available to help do that. There's no federal funds available for that. Then there were some state funds available. So one of the reasons to use TIF to meet the objectives, and I come back to the fact that it's got to be consistent with the planning objectives. The reason is that TIF is a local tool that can be used to meet the local residents and local businesses' needs. So it's one that encourages redevelopment. And I'd point out that a lot of times what we see in an older downtown area is businesses that would like to expand. They'd like to do rehabilitation. They'd like to do facade improvements. They don't have the funds to do it. TIF is a way that funds can come in and help them do that. It also serves to coordinate the activities downtown. So you don't have hodgepodge development. You have development that's consistent with what you said is the comprehensive plan. Let me go on to the next one. So these are just sort of the same thing, the strategic and planning objectives. These are contained in a whole bunch of documents, and as Brian alluded to, you can get all those online. We're happy to send you all of what you want, but you know, I know your time is valuable. Those documents basically contain the planning operative documents the village board has already adopted, a specific redevelopment plan, goals and objectives for the area, a budget over a 23-year period of time, qualification reports, how this meets state standards, and what's termed a housing impact study. If we can go to the next one. I think Brian's covered this in terms of the area and why we're looking at this particular area and what a relatively small portion it is of the village of Cary as a whole. The next one. So why does the TIF designation make sense? And one of the things to point out is the village, before it even decided to go forward with the process, had us conduct a qualification study. A detailed us, okay, does it meet the basic standards according to state law? Well, we found that the Central Cary TIF district did qualify. It meets criteria for what's termed a conservation area. And although this is not a legal term, conservation area in my mind means you want to conserve the area. You want the basic things in downtown that you all probably moved to Cary for. You want those home-owned stores. You want that proximity to the train station. So the idea is to conserve the basic character. Under the law, it means that 50% of the structures are more than 35 years of age or older. 83% of the structures are more than 35 years of age. It further means you got to meet 6 out of 13 qualification factors, and it's not for individual buildings, it's the area as a whole reasonably distributed. Then, as Scott referred to before, if the TIF district has more than 10 occupied residential units, which could be displaced, you have to do a housing impact study. And I want to just pause there to emphasize something that was said before. That's what state law requires. It doesn't mean that there's going to be any displacement. And what I've typically experienced, and Brett's typically experienced in situations in which there is any displacement, it's a developer comes in, identifies a block, says, I'd like to do a new development there. Goes to the village says, conceptually, we don't have a problem with it, but you gotta provide for homeowners there. You've got to take care of those people on your own. We're not providing money for you to buy that out. This is typically what happens. The developer then has to negotiate with the homeowners. He wants to buy them out, he's got to pay fair market value. I have situations in a number of communities where in order for that to happen, what's paid is much more than fair market value. Or situations in which the developer can't convince the homeowners to sell their houses. In which case, and I'm not speaking for the village, but I can say typically what happens is the village is going to stand up for its homeowners and say, if you can't work out a deal, tough. We don't want the development. So if we go to the next slide. This is just a quick overview. There's a lot of detail on these. These are 6 factors that we found that qualified the area. These are largely tied to age of the area, the need for new infrastructure in the area, the need for new facilities and parking. And then, go to the next one. Okay. So the housing impact study, and again, I'm repeating some of this that was talked about. There's 95 single-family homes, 178 multifamily units. The village identified 22 single-family units which could be impacted. There's no current plans. There's nothing on the table for displacement. I don't think there's a specific development proposal at all. So the housing impact study identifies if, again, emphasis on if there was any plan to relocate, what would it be? What would be the type and extent of relocation assistance to be provided? Where would that additional housing come from? So that any displacement that might occur would be paid for with respect to the TIF. And again, the emphasis of if, when, it would happen altogether. So what the village is saying is that if that is the result of TIF, the village will step up to the plate and take care of any displacement monetary needs. Okay, this is the proposed TIF budget. I think the main points we wanted to share here is if you look at proposed $60 million is over a period of 23 years. It's not additional taxes on anybody else. Remember those 2 buckets? It's an idea of what goes into the second bucket. If you don't get the $60 million, you won't spend $60 million. The emphasis here is on the line items that the village is looking to undertake. Demolition, site preparation, environmental cleanup. You've got some older facilities that have got environmental difficulties. It's providing money for that. You've got public improvements, basically aging infrastructure that you need to provide for it. And the other major line item is school district costs, library costs, and taxing district capital costs. One of the things to note here is that under TIF law, to the extent that net new students are produced in the schools have a first right to a set aside of TIF dollars. In short, up to 40% of the TIF increment, that second pot, is set aside, and to the extent there are school students that are generated by new development in the area, the schools are entitled, on a state-mandated tuition basis, to have that money. And again, I emphasize, it's first lien. Village has to honor that before it pays any other obligations. Similarly with the library. The library is a per-patron basis, but the library gets offsetting amounts for new library patients that are produced. Also capital costs. If there are capital costs that the schools, library, fire protection district, anybody would incur within the boundaries of the TIF district, those also could be paid for by TIF funds. Next one. I think that Ryan really already covered this in terms of the AV analysis. The point here is that when you look on paper, you say, is this a large TIF district? Comparatively, it's not that large. We often see TIFs with a similar percentage of up to 10, 15% of the equalized assessed valuation within the area. I would call this a modest size TIF, and again emphasizing that the purpose of setting the boundaries, as Brian mentioned, was to include the downtown area. Okay, this is the process and steps. You want me to just outline, or you want to go through this?
Sure, you can go through it, it's fine.
Okay. So, village actually started this a little bit before November, actually last spring, and authorizing a qualification study. So the village has been very deliberate, very transparent in my mind with respect to it. Village in November approved an ordinance authorizing the development of the preliminary eligibility study. Village mailed notice of the adoption of the ordinance of the preliminary eligibility study to all the taxing districts as a prerequisite and as a show of good faith. The village in December approved the ordinance commissioning the TIF redevelopment plan, which is sort of the second phase of the TIF step. Mailing of notices then took place to all taxing districts by certified mail. Village also published notice, and Brian referred to this, an interested parties registry. If anyone wants any of the information, any and all the information with respect to the TIF district, you merely have to come into the village, sign up for an interested parties registry, all of that, and I assume it would be delivered by email or electronically at this point in time. All of that is available. For those of you who want, can't sleep at night, you want some more paper to read, you have that available. So the village published that notice. Obviously, they published notice of this public meeting and got a good turnout for that. So the village will now, after this public meeting, after the notice of the public meeting, obviously having the public meeting on April 12th. And I guess, do we have another one of this? Okay. So the eligibility report, the redevelopment plan, and project and housing impact study are in near final form, and they will be available sometime in the next month, and that announcement will be made on the village website. Then in June, there's a process that involves all of the major taxing districts. So the elementary district, the high school district, library district, park district, fire protection district, village, county, community college district. They all sit around the table. They're presented with all these reports. They're asked to make some judgments with respect to qualifications under the Act. They're asked to make comments with respect to the redevelopment plan and the objectives set forth. They have up to 30 days to meet. They can meet every day if they want to, many times as they want. Ask whatever questions they need to have addressed. When they reach a conclusion, they bring that to the village board. The village board considers that usually as part of the public hearing process, takes that input, makes a decision. If the joint review board says, hey, we don't think this is a good idea, we object to this, then there's a reconciliation period of up to 30 days in which the joint review board, the taxing district, meet with the village to see if they can come to some reconciliation. If that doesn't work, can it still be adopted by the village board? Yes, but it takes a supermajority in order to be able to do that. So all that process takes place before a public hearing. Public hearing takes place in these chambers. We're projecting that sometime in June. Then in August, the board will be able, after all that input, to consider adoption of the ordinances. Just a final note on that, or two final notes, I guess. One is that any entitlements are subject to village board approval. Somebody wants to come in with a new plan for downtown, they've got to go through planning and zoning. They've got to go through all of the needs for permits. They've got to go need for infrastructure improvements. They don't get any breaks on that. They've got to go through all that. And any expenditure, including any incentive for a development, must finally be approved by the village board in a public manner, in a public forum. Subsequent to that, there is annual audits mandated by the state and annual meetings of all the taxing districts to monitor how things are going within that particular TIF district. So I think it's a pretty transparent process. It's one where it invites a lot of public input and invites a lot of discussion.
Thank you, Phil. And just to summarize here as far as wrapping up where we're at, as far as the key takeaways from the presentation, we have two slides here that kind of touch the high-level points. So TIF really is intended to spur development or an investment in community. So whether it's a new redevelopment of a property or if it's incorporating a new business coming in and helping with building out of a tenant space so that business can operate in a space, there's certainly ways that TIF can be utilized from a standpoint to encourage new business or even existing businesses to grow within the community. The TIF, as we're proposing here, as mentioned, it's comparable in size to other TIFs that are in the county. Certainly, there's other areas of the state of Illinois that have TIF districts, but we focus specifically on McHenry County and how this TIF compares to existing TIFs within other communities in the county. It's similar in size from a standpoint of both the number of parcels that are within the TIF and also with the EAV as well. As mentioned, less than 3% of the tax parcels that are in the village of Cary are incorporated into this TIF, and less than 4% of the total EAV of all the taxing bodies that are affected by the TIF are also incorporated in this as well. So although, yes, there will be impact potentially to those districts, it's not a large area that would have a significant impact going forward. Likewise, there is, as Phil mentioned, there's the overview of the TIF as it continues to operate. There will be the joint review board that will review the documents that we have in a draft form currently. That'll be convened in June, and then annually thereafter, we've been meeting with the joint review board to review the TIF reports that are submitted to the state on an annual basis for how the TIF operates. As Phil mentioned, there is the ability for the TIF to provide additional reimbursement to both the library and school districts. That is within the state act, is that any new students that are generated from a project, so if there's a new housing development that comes in that receives assistance from the TIF, and there's 10 students that come out of that development, the school district and the library district would receive direct funds related to the school district number of students, and the library district, the number of patrons that would come out of that project. So there's ability for them to still receive financing from the TIF district going forward. Again, as mentioned, the TIF budget would be available for review in the village. Any items that are approved within the TIF would be part of our regular budget process that the village would approve on an annual basis. There would be separate approvals required by both the village board before any TIF funds are expended. So any project that is proposed within the village would still have to go through the village's zoning process and receive necessary zoning approvals from a development standpoint to ensure that it complies with the village's local regulations as well. The recovered value of the increment when the TIF is completed after the 23 years of time period that a TIF is allowed to be in place from a state statute standpoint, all of that new growth that potentially could occur within that TIF is allowed to be captured by the taxing districts at the end of that time period. So if there's no growth occurring within the TIF currently, the the presence of the TIF district would allow for new growth to occur, but then also at the end of that life period, the village does not maintain that property indefinitely. It does go back on the tax rolls. The individual taxing districts can collect that increase in EAV, and that would help further their tax base as well. Also, if the TIF does exceptionally well and there's a large amount of surplus of funds that are available in the TIF that are not earmarked for development or for public improvements, it is possible that the village can declare surplus funds, and that those funds can be distributed to the taxing districts throughout the life of the TIF. The example of TIF 1, when that expired, we did have a surplus in that fund. So there were funds that were distributed out to the taxing districts that are affected by that TIF. And also with TIF 2, there currently is a fund of approximately $180,000 in that fund. So when that is dissolved later this year, those funds will be distributed to the taxing bodies as well, so they'll be able to utilize that for their general operations and their general budgeting. So that's kind of an overview of the proposed TIF and how TIF works. The next portion of the meeting will be to provide those of you that are present here this evening an opportunity to provide public comment and also answer questions as well. Sign-in sheet. So just for ease of operation, I know we have a large number of people here, and I want to be valuable or cognizant of people's time from that standpoint. So if there are groups that are here that have similar concerns, if it's possible to have a spokesperson to voice a concern for a group versus individuals from that standpoint, I would encourage that. Obviously, if everybody wants to speak, you're certainly entitled to speak as well. But if we have the similar comments that are coming up repeatedly, just for the sake of individuals' time, I would like to provide the opportunity for an individual spokesperson to represent a group as well. Also, we did have a sign-in sheet as you walked in, so I will go through the sign-in sheet to call on individuals if you'd like to speak from that standpoint. If you did not sign in, don't worry, you will have an opportunity to speak as well. Just when I go through the sign-in sheet, if there's individuals that would still like to speak afterwards, we can invite you up to the podium to speak as well. And then if you wouldn't mind signing in at the podium, just so we have a name and record of who is attendance from that standpoint. So the information this evening we're being recorded. It will be provided in minutes to our board as well, so they can be advised as far as what type of comments and feedback we did receive this evening. But I do, again, welcome the opportunity to hear your feedback. I'll be able to go through the list here and multiple sheets, yes. I'll go through the list just to see who would like to speak. So Kathy Fragamore? Kathy? Okay. Marshall Lau?
First of all, I looked at the color and outline of your TIF district, and I don't understand why you stopped it at certain places. You have 4 lots on Route 14. You've owned those lots since 2006. You paid $725,000 for those lots. Up until this point, the village has none of the taxing districts have gotten any taxes off of that because it's municipal owned. My question to you is, why didn't you take the lots behind those 4 lots on Weaver Drive all the way down to Montana, come back on East Main Street? The lots on the south side of East Main Street, where the CVS pharmacy is already zoned business, but yet you're leaving the houses on the other side, houses. If you're trying to create a district that's going to generate something, why don't you generate something that's usable? My guess is that the reason those lots on Route 14 never sold is they're 136 foot deep. There isn't enough depth there to put any kind of a sized building and a parking lot on those lots. But yet, in the TIF district, if you'd have taken the lots behind that on Weaver Drive, now you've got a chunk of land that a developer can do something with. It just doesn't make sense what you guys have outlined in that thing. To me, anyway. The other thing that I have is TIF districts. The municipality should demand to know the financial viability of the developer. Clearly, if a company has sufficient assets to fully fund its own way, then the request for public funds is questionable and should be challenged. That's out of the tax increment financing book. The other thing is in here, they have alternates. Taxing districts are authorized to abate real estate taxes for certain categories of property as an incentive to attract or maintain commercial industrial facilities. An abatement might be a good compromise for a municipality that needs to commercially develop and is able to forego a portion of its property taxes until the development is generating revenue, becomes self-sufficient. That's also in the tax increment financing book. I don't understand why, if you guys explored the tax abatements rather than create the TIF district.
Those are excellent points, and I absolutely agree with you in terms of.
Beg your pardon?
Those are excellent points, and I absolutely agree with you in terms of the developer has to prove the deed. That's the but for, and it's contained in the redevelopment plan. It says if a developer can't prove up a need, then he's not going to get any assistance whatsoever. In terms of the abatements, abatements tend to be very effective and worthwhile for industrial projects. We've had several in Kane County recently, had one in Algonquin and down in Montgomery, where a larger industrial project, and those work well in terms of the tax abatements. Tax abatements depend upon each individual taxing district making their own decision. Tax abatements don't tend to have much impact on smaller lots, on commercial property, or on residential property in terms of spurring development. So there are other tools out there as well. There's a business district that imposes an additional 1% sales tax on an area. We looked at that and said, that's not generally good for a downtown area. That's good. You use that in like Yorktown and Lombard, major shopping malls. There's special service areas that you can use for public improvements, but those impose another property tax. So you're absolutely right. Other local financing tools should be looked at. We didn't feel they applied in this case.
Why?
Just because I explained, if you did a special service area, you could finance a number of infrastructure, but then the existing property owners would have to pay additional property taxes. And we don't have industrial. I don't think that's any part of the plan downtown. So if you don't have industrial, you really can't get usage of tax abatements. Tax abatements don't tend to be helpful to commercial businesses.
All you people here should go to your taxing districts and tell them to vote against it. That way it will fail.
Sorry, Adam Race wrote? Kathy LeBron?
I moved to Cary 27 years ago. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. I don't do public very well. I moved to this town because it was family-oriented, and there was a lot of children, and they were real big on education and sports programs. And I want to know, in this TIF program, you're going to help these people that are being displaced their homes. But what about the Cary Youth Baseball program? What are you gonna do with relocating all these children and all these families? Did you know that, I don't know how many years ago, there was a referendum here in Cary, and we put on the ballot to purchase land at the corner of Georgetown and Main Street. And we bought that land and we voted for it because the plan is to purchase this big hunk of land. The land that's adjacent to 31, we would sell it and we would create a sports complex. Did we do that? We voted for it. Did we do that? No, we got a dog park. A dog park. If we'd have put in those baseball fields back then, we wouldn't be in that situation in Cary Youth Baseball, and all these children wouldn't be without their fields. Are we gonna relocate the kids, or are we just gonna throw them to the wolves? That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Kathy. James Graziano? Yes. Thank you. Melanie Shaker? Yes. Renee Bordeaux? Yes. Brad? Sorry. Adwick? Adcock? Adcock, yes.
One thing I have a question is, why is the mayor's office excluded? That one little spot downtown? Got an answer?
Yeah, yes, very briefly. I will say, we do want to take all of the information that you'd like to share with this group tonight. We have this televised and videotaped, and we want to provide you careful, studied answers to the questions that you're raising. You deserve those. So we may not be able to answer for every speaker that comes up, answer your questions tonight, but we will do our best to answer those as soon as we can and post that information either on the website or otherwise disseminate it. As to that question, under the TIF Act, if there is a conflict of interest and a property interest involved with any of the elected officials, a particular property interest, there's certain that exclude that land from being included in the TIF. So on that basis, we are excluding that property because there could be a potential interest, impermissible interest under the statute.
Okay. The only other thing is I disagree with some of the boundaries. That's about it.
Thank you. Sorry, David Shepard? I'm going to defer to Dr. Coleman. Sure.
Good evening. I'm here, Brian Coleman, 337 Adam Court, Cary. I've been a long-term resident of Cary for almost 35 years and currently superintendent of Cary School District 26. I'm here to representing the interests of District 26, its board members, administrators, teachers, support staff, and most importantly, District 26 students tonight. Thank you for the opportunity to provide public input on the proposed redevelopment project area and now the Central Cary Tax Increment Financing District, now known as TIF District Number 3. While these projects can spur on community development and property values, they can also defer much-needed revenue away from school districts. Because TIF financing districts redirect property taxes from the local school district to the village, the TIF can have a negative effect on the school district's revenue, thus impacting the district's ability to meet the increasing needs of our students and our staff. As I've shared with the village officials on a number of occasions, as a school district, we would not be in favor of the village approval of the Central Cary Tax Increment Finance District due to its potential negative financial impact on the district's future increase of revenue. Although the district understands that the village has a right to utilize all of the financial tools available to further the development of the village, this should not be done at the detriment of its own school district. I understand that one of the reasons for creating a TIF is that if not for the creation of the TIF district and use of the tax increment financing, the area would not be developed. Developers, of course, have a great deal to gain by receiving TIF financing, while school districts potentially have a great deal to lose by funding this financing. Since the Maplewood property has been up for sale, the district has received interest from a number of developers to purchase the site without the offering of a financial assistance generated by a TIF district. As recently as March 2021, the District 26 Board of Education approved a purchase agreement with AR Building Company for the sale of Maplewood property in the amount of $2.75 million. This was $250,000 over the asking price of the district. AR Building Company ended up terminating the purchase agreement with the district during the government approval phase. The village's strong stance of the developer build an additional road on the back of the property. The district has actually sold this property several times over the last 10 years without a TIF. It is the district's belief, based on this recent experience, that a TIF district is not needed to entice companies to develop the property within the proposed TIF district and does not pass the but-for test. We know the developers would welcome TIF financing, but this would potentially be at the cost of the school district and other taxing bodies. Currently, the total EAV of the projected TIF represents roughly 4% of the total EAV for Cary School District 26. In our rough estimate, based on the village's proposed TIF district, District 26 could potentially lose the following revenue over the life of a 23-year TIF district. In the first year, $42,000. Year 5, $222,000. Year 10, $1,225,000. These are cumulative. 20 years out, $6,372,000. And then at the end of the TIF, year 23 is about $8,377. So $42,000 in the first year is the cost of a new teacher. $1,225,000 in 10 years is 29 teachers. $8,377,000 in 23 years is 199 teachers at the end of this TIF. $42,000 in the first year is the cost of educating 4 students in District 26. $1,225,000 in 10 years is the cost of educating 102 students. $8,377,000 in 23 years is the cost of educating 698 students over that period of time. It's also important to understand the long-term effect of a 23-year TIF on a school district. If the TIF is established, our current kindergartners will have graduated from high school, graduated from college, and potentially have kindergartners of their own entering District 26 before this TIF is dissolved. As a school district, we understand the importance that the village continue to pursue new economic development and growth. We also want the village officials to understand the importance of maintaining a strong and financially stable school district. Quality communities have quality schools. One thing that makes Cary a great place for families and attractive are its schools. The TIF would stifle the ability of the school district to meet the needs of new families moving into the district. Therefore, District 26 is not in favor of establishing a new TIF district in Cary due to its negative financial impact on the district. Thank you.
Kathy Moran? Yes. David Spilio? Dave Spilio? Scott Gregerson? Yep. Laura White?
Good evening, I'm Laura White. I am the president of the Cary Education Association. I'm also a resident of Cary. Thank you, Dr. Coleman, for your statements. I just wanted to state for the record that the teachers support everything that Dr. Coleman stated. We have worked really hard to get out of the financial issues that the district has faced, and it has been on the back of the teachers. We want great schools in Cary. We want great teachers in Cary. Baseball is also an important thing in Cary, right? The youth. We want to make Cary great for our youth. So we are not in agreement with this TIF district and how it would impact the youth of Cary and the teachers and the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason White?
Thank you for the presentation tonight. I know how much hard work goes into this. Other people have already spoken much more eloquently about this. I just wanted to say, as a resident here for 20 years, I agree with the concerns about the impacts on Cary Youth Baseball, and I agree with the concerns on the impacts on Cary District 26, which I can tell you from my experience in talking to teachers in the area, parents in the area, we are facing a difficult task of maintaining quality teachers. We are currently not paying our teachers as competitively as other school districts in the area, and 3 to 4% sounds small on paper, but every dollar amount counts right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Spizzirri?
Yes.
Yes. Ron Cope? Judy Laughlin?
Hi, thanks. Nice to see you all. I own Wild Rose Floral Design at 27 East Main Street. I've interacted with some of you before. I just actually have a question, well, probably a couple questions. One is, could someone explain a TIF in dollars? So me, as a small business owner, if my taxes are $5,000 a year, what does that equate to in dollars, right? How do I, as a business owner, absorb that, have to pass it on to my customers? How does that work? And I think for everyone here that is a resident or in this TIF district, it would just be nice to have an example versus saying, here's the range, you know, in the dollars and everything. You have all done very well. But if you could put that into real terms for us as an example. And then number two is, someone earlier had said that businesses and residents within the TIF could request funds for their use. So is that through a process that would be explained at some point? So I do have a 110-year-old building that the flower shop is in. So if my parking lot needs to be repaved or plumbing needs to be fixed or something of that nature, do I have to, you know, how does that work? And again, how does that work for anyone here? And homeowners who do not have a business, is there going to be a difference in the equalized assessed value for a homeowner versus a business? And I probably could go on and on with a lot of questions. I don't know that this is the right forum, but those were probably my three main questions. So number one was, can you give us an example of what it means, right? If I have a $5,000 tax bill today, what will it be when the TIF is applied? And does it keep increasing over time? Will my EAV keep increasing year over year? So over the 23 years, my tax is going to keep increasing. Number two, how do businesses and residents within the TIF request funds for their use? And then what is the difference with the rate of the TIF for businesses versus residents? Thank you.
Oh, fine. So just to answer those questions real quick, so to explain how a TIF would affect a property owner or a business owner or whoever's paying taxes within the area. So if your taxes today are, to use example, $5,000, it would be the same as if you're in the TIF versus outside the TIF. As Phil mentioned earlier, the TIF is not a separate tax that goes on top of what you're currently paying from a tax perspective. What does occur within the TIF is that as taxing districts adjust their levies or their tax rates, or the EAV goes up and the taxable value of the property goes up, the TIF captures whatever that increase was. So if you're paying $5,000 today, the taxing districts that are affected by the TIF will still receive their share of that $5,000 for the life of the TIF. as your taxes generally go up, so if it goes up next year to $5,100, that $100 is what gets captured and goes into the special fund for a TIF. Your taxes would go up similar to any other property that's not within the TIF, similar rate. So it's not specifically a tax that's assigned to a property within the TIF. As far as funds being available for businesses, that would be something that the village board would have to consider as the fund is created, how those funds would be expended within the TIF. So there are communities, other communities that we have worked for or in the area that have utilized TIF funds for facade improvement grants or reinvestment of existing buildings. So those are ways that communities have provided assistance for reinvesting in existing space. So if a business locates into a vacancy and there's $20,000 build out that's required in there, there could be a matching grant where the village could assist with a portion of those costs. So certainly that type of program would be something that the village would need to consider and implement as this project were to go forward. And then as far as the rate of the TIF, I think that's kind of similar from a standpoint. The tax rate that you have within the TIF would be the same as if you were outside the TIF. There's no difference. You wouldn't be paying extra if the property was located within the TIF from a property tax standpoint. The only thing that changes is the share of your tax bill that goes towards the TIF versus the other taxing districts as you would go forward. Next, I have Dan Jans. Sorry, reading handliner here. Cary PD, Park Districts. Jones. Sorry. Dan Jones.
Sorry, my writing's not good.
Dan Jones.
Dan Jones, Executive Director, Cary Park District. I would just say that the Park District at this time doesn't have any specific comments related to the TIF. We appreciate the opportunity to come here and get information, and that the staff of the village has made themselves available to other taxing bodies to answer questions that have come up. I'd also add that we have 3 of our elected officials are here tonight. I know that the other 2 were very interested in coming as well to learn more about this, but had other obligations. For now, we don't have any other further comment other than thank you for having us.
Chris Zaganto on Krenz Avenue. Chris. Martha Ritter. Fran, all right, is it Stenke from on Alita Drive? Yes. Pass, thank you. And I apologize if I'm not pronouncing names correctly by reading here. Scott Lind on, is it Grove Avenue, Grove Lane? All right. Gerald Adu? Pass. Thank you. Karen and Paul Bell? Pass. Thank you. Melissa Victor? Yep. Lynn Caccavello? Diane McNulty? Diane? Elizabeth Gregerson? You. Todd Gagliano? Bill Hawk? You. Larry Haynes? Barb Lau? Tom Lau? Jason Janzik? Yep. Patrick McKinney?
Thanks for giving me a moment to address. Dr. Patrick McEnany with Northern Illinois Foot and Ankle Specialists. I'm right in the heart of downtown. We've been in downtown for 25 years now. What I will say is that this TIF district is kind of an insult to these businesses that have been around for such a long time. We're in a situation right now that I have elderly people trying to come to my practice and see me, and the streets have been blocked off. which I've had patients calling up and canceling their care right now because they drove by and there's no parking. And so, we're here to help the community, we always have been, but now on top of this, you're negatively affecting my business by making it hard for my patients in wheelchairs, crutches, and people who've had surgery to get to my office. And now on top of that, you're gonna tax me more on top of that. I just don't see how this bodes well for, us businesses that have been here for a long time. Second thing is, I'd just like a raise of hands. Who up front looking at us is in this TIF district or has a business in the TIF district? Okay, just on note, nobody. And then how many people on the voting board that are gonna vote on this final project are in the TIF district or have businesses in the TIF district? Do we have an answer for that?
We had a partial answer before. There was a question before about property in the TIF. None of the elected officials can have property in the TIF.
Okay.
That would be a statutory conflict.
All right, thank you.
Casey Cacchiato, sorry, Spring Street? There. I apologize if I butcher the names.
Everybody does.
That's right.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions, and I know I understand that might not have answers for them tonight, but wanted to present a couple of things that us as a downtown business have come up with once we read the proposals. First off, in the description of the TIF tax increment law, it notes that TIF districts are for blighted areas. The question of why we're calling the downtown area blighted came up, and why it's referred to as that, since a lot of it, I don't believe, is blighted. Secondly, how does the TIF negatively affect our property values? What impact does that have on property values for residents and/or businesses? Next, is it found that the TIF makes the property less desirable for resale because of the uncertainty associated with the TIF? Next, will the TIF make it harder to sell our properties, being in a TIF district? Next, what is the intent for the downtown area? I know there was the talk of the proposal that was put out there, but will the, I don't know if it's the taxing body, or will the village have the ability to sell our properties if we don't want to, if it's deemed something that somebody else wants? And my last question was already answered, so thank you.
Do you want to just respond to the blighted areas?
Yeah, this area, based upon our study thus far, qualifies as what's termed a conservation area. Conservation area, going back to it, more than 50% of the buildings are 35 years of age or older.
Can you speak up, please?
Yes, I'm sorry. So it's a conservation area. Conservation area, this is not a defined term in the act, the one I'm about to say, but a conservation area generally says that you want to conserve the essential character of the area. The act defines blighted or any of the factors, and they define them in certain ways, which a layperson like myself wouldn't ordinarily think of as blighted. For example, age is a factor in it. Lack of community planning, which really means that properties were developed before there was a community plan. Obsolescence, which is heavily tied to age. If you had a structure built in the 1920s, it's probably not the same structure you would build in 2023. So the definition of blight or factors of any kind under the statute are not the same kind of blighting factors that you'd find in an inner city in some particular neighborhood. So again, this is a conservation area. The factors that we outlined, and which will be in more detail in the eligibility report, are factors for a conservation area. They refer to factors that are found, again, in the area as a whole, not individual buildings. I would tell you that most of them relate to the age of the area and to the inadequacy of utilities in the area.
And another, jump on some other questions you had as well, as far as the impact on property values. So the TIF district would not have a direct impact on a value of property within the TIF versus outside the TIF, it still would be assessed by the county in a similar fashion as far as the type of improvements that are on the property. And then from a desirability standpoint to sell the property, there may be more interest in particular properties within the TIF area from the private market or private developers that would be interested in potentially purchasing property. So there are, as we mentioned, there are no plans from the village's perspective to acquire property or relocate properties or businesses that are in this area. You would potentially, when the TIF is created, or if a TIF is created, be approached by the private development market or private developers that may have interest in acquiring your property, but certainly that whether a property owner wants to sell or not is certainly their own prerogative from a standpoint if you're willing to sell to somebody your property. So it may increase interest in this area from the private sector, and that's essentially what TIF is designed to do, is to improve an area that's been stagnant from a development perspective, is to try to encourage some reinvestment into that area. So there may be more interest going forward from that standpoint if a TIF is created.
Just add one thought to that.
Sure.
There are not good studies on this, okay? And there are studies that sort of are all over the place. But anecdotally, I think if you know somebody, for example, who has a business in downtown Des Plaines or Arlington Heights or someplace, if you might ask them, did their business increase in value when there was more traffic in the area? To the extent there's more traffic created because of successful development in the area, most businesses, I think, see a benefit in terms of the valuation. I'm not talking about just the property valuation, but they're going to sell more goods if there's more property, if there's more traffic in the area in a more vibrant place.
Michelle Bronst? Pass. Michael, sorry. Dave King? Greg Hopley? John Pfeiffer? Right.
So I've lived in the area my whole life. I grew up in Crystal Lake and moved back once I married my wife to Cary. One of the main things that people look at for Cary is that it still has that small town feel and it's a family area. I keep hearing you say this is a conservation area where we want to conserve the integrity of the area, but that's not, this is the antithesis of that. You've also mentioned Des Plaines numerous times. If we wanted to live in Des Plaines, we probably would have moved there. Second, it seems like there's no actual targeted businesses. You're wiping things out. Hopefully somebody will come and put a business there, maybe. But what you're doing is you're wiping out 70 years of history. Maplewood School, yeah, the school itself is a piece of garbage, but those fields have been there since the 50s. Cary is known as one of the great hubs for youth sports in this area. So in order to try and preserve Cary's hometown feel, you're going to wipe out our history. Yes, this TIF district, as you've said multiple times, is a very small area in comparison to many more. You know what else is small? A bullet. If you shoot someone in the heart, they're going to die. It's not a matter of, that it's a small thing. You want to bring people in, invest in the community. Don't try to transform the community into Des Plaines. Okay, and that's, I don't think any of this was talked through with people who actually live in the community. This seems like a tax grab, if you ask me. We're throwing away what we have in the hopes of getting something else that will probably just end up like an empty field like we have on 14 across from CVS, as mentioned earlier. So I guess my question is, with all of this, we're taking out sidewalks downtown to put in pavers and trees. Was this really necessary? Is this a good use of tax funding? Last I checked, downtown isn't hurting. We have 3 pretty well-acclaimed restaurants that have opened in the last 15 years down there. We don't need to tear the place down to make it attractive for people to come in. So my thought is just, think about what the community is. We're not Des Plaines. We don't want shelves of people just here to commute on the train. This is where kids grow up. And by disadvantaging them through what was mentioned by Dr. Coleman and getting rid of our most important heart of Cary Grove baseball, who's going to want to move back here after they leave? There's no baseball for the kids. We can't play on the bigger fields because we have to pay the park district. I thought that's what taxes were for. But, I think we need to think less about spreadsheets and new tax revenue and start cultivating what we already have here. That's all I have to say.
I think, John, I do want to kind of respond to a few items. So from the history of the ball fields on the property, so certainly I understand from the history standpoint, the fields have been a long part of the village of Cary, and they've been in that location for decades at this point. Like the main issue from that standpoint is it's not a property that the village owns. It's something that a property owner is looking to potentially sell that site. So the TIF is not looking at specific properties that we have a developer lined up that could specifically come in that's going to redevelop something. These are looking at potential areas for growth. I understand from a standpoint of looking at what the village wants to be or what everybody's vision is for the community. The village has gone through long time, several planning efforts to get feedback from the community through the comprehensive planning process. Through the comprehensive planning process.
Where was that? I don't know anybody who was a part of that.
The village had over several hundred people that participated in that process back in 2015.
Oh, 2015, okay, so it's recent. That's good. Going back to this, I believe somebody else, Dr. Coleman, also came up and said that we've been able to sell Maplewood before, so why do we need the TIF district in order to sell the school? When we could possibly save a historic part of downtown rather than wiping it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Darling? Bob Johnson?
Good evening. My name is Bob Johnson. My wife and I moved to Cary in 1997 and have raised our 3 boys here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. As someone who's been in public safety for nearly 28 years, I appreciate your dedication, service, and sacrifice. I am not here tonight to speak as a resident, nor am I here to specifically discuss the proposed TIF district. I am here tonight as the president of Cary Grove Youth Baseball and Softball, CGYBS, representing our nearly 500 players and their families. CGYBS is a not-for-profit organization run by volunteers. Cary is an attractive place to live and raise a family and offers many desirable amenities, including youth sports. This marks the 70th year CGYBS has been providing baseball and softball to the youth of Cary and Fox River Grove. CGYBS receives no funding from the Village of Cary or from the Cary Park District. The Village of Cary benefits from the existence of and work performed by organizations such as CGYBS. CGYBS currently has 13 baseball and softball fields in Cary and Fox River Grove. 6 of those 13 fields are located at the former Maplewood Elementary School. In addition to the 6 fields located at Maplewood, our equipment storage shed and main concession stand are located at Maplewood. The loss of our fields and structures at Maplewood would significantly hinder our ability to continue to provide baseball and softball to our youth, while also placing financial burdens and financial loss on our organization that would be challenging for any not-for-profit organization to overcome. Please consider the following. The benefits of youth sports are many and well documented. To highlight a few, lowered anxiety, depression, and stress, higher self-esteem and confidence, physical health, and increased life satisfaction. Baseball and softball have been played at Maplewood for 70 years. We have players whose parents and grandparents played on those fields. Homes and buildings with significant historic value receive a plaque marking the history for all to see. This proposal, the ones before it, threatened to wipe away 70 years of baseball and softball history, unheard of in most communities. Because Maplewood has 6 fields in one location, evenings and weekends during the season attract family, neighbors, and friends to a significant community gathering place. Maplewood is a magical place where community members meet and socialize. Cary has nothing to replace this loss. CGYBS hosts 2 tournaments during the summer, which are both predominantly held at Maplewood. Teams from as far away as Wheaton have attended this tournament, now in its 41st year. Not only does Maplewood impress those in attendance by hearkening back to the field locations of the past, but the tournament brings business into Cary at no cost to the village. When considering this issue, many may simply think of the loss of fields and structures. We are extremely proud to be the first employer for hundreds of current and former players in the field crew, umpires, and concessions. In addition to the loss of opportunity to employ our youth, we will lose significant revenue generated by the Maplewood concession stand. The concession stand at Cary Junior High serves only 2 fields. This stand is an amenity for our families and those visiting from out of town. It is not a revenue generator due to low volume. The concession stand at the Algonquin Road Schoolhouse in Fox River Grove also would only serve 2 fields and require an estimated $100,000 to prepare it to function. The suggestion to use Park District fields to offset the loss of our fields is cost prohibitive under the current circumstances. In closing, I fully understand and appreciate what the village is trying to do. The village of Cary is facing an identity crisis, trying to decide what this place is and what is truly important. For CGYBS, it's 500 players and their families. For the generations past and to come, moving forward with the proposed TIF district would destroy an important and significant place in Cary. Please do not let that happen. If the decision is made to move forward, please consider assisting CGYBS with this monumental loss. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Joe Eberhardt? Last sheet of names here, Larry Pagnoni. Chris Pagnoni. Kim and Scott Wilkinson. Yes. Bethany and, apologize, live on Swallow Lane. John? John, you said?
John, yeah. So my kind of question and comment, I mean, I'd love to see Cary downtown revitalized. I think it's great, great plan. I haven't looked at the whole comprehensive plan, but like he was saying, like you mentioned, Des Plaines, Arlington Heights, Palatine. I don't think that we have the infrastructure, like the way that the street goes through the town, the way that the train is set up, like the station is set up. I just don't see that type of downtown. And I'm looking at a lot of places here on the map, and they're not even a part of just the downtown. It's like kind of expanded out in areas that don't really include that. So it doesn't seem to me exactly like it's a downtown revitalization. So I hope that, you guys have a plan as to people who are gonna come in here, and this isn't just gonna be like, hey, we're trying to do something. Like he was mentioning, like we're hoping for people to come in here, because I think that people would have already started to come. We already seen, like he was saying, there's the vacant lot there. I think in those towns like Palatine, Arlington Heights, they did these things when people were moving into those places. They already had many established, businesses in that we're kind of talking about here. So that's kind of my take on it. I just don't see our town, the way that it's set up with 14, the train station, for that, like, that type of downtown. I think our downtown is what it is, and I think we should just make it better for what it is and not try to make it into something that it's not.
Thank you. Jenny and Mike. Janae? Sorry.
Hi, I'm a resident and a teacher here. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Coleman and Mrs. White for speaking on behalf of the students and the teachers. Personally, I do not support this program either, but I want to thank you for interacting when the people are here. You're actually responding to us. Thank you. My first question is, because I'm a little confused, if you can explain that TIF 1 is now back in this TIF 3, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Is that because it was not successful as a TIF 1?
No, so TIF 1 was successful as far as it generated new growth within that area. It did generate some new development. The EAV did improve.
But it's water over there in that Jack's channels. How is that new development?
So, yes, so the TIF did start some new development. There are some improvements that have been performed in there that have laid the groundwork for additional development to come in. There still is areas that can continue to be developed. When the village was discussing the contours of this TIF, originally it was to go from Carroll-Gunkin Road to the ComEd power line, so kind of the east end, west end. But when identified there are still parcels in that area that could benefit and still need improvements, specifically the Jack's Channel site. There are significant improvements that would be necessary in order to develop that site. The board wanted to incorporate that site into the proposed
But
TIF contours.
it was in the, excuse me, sorry, it was 23 years, correct, already?
Correct.
And that did not happen already, correct?
Correct.
Correct, okay. So you're trying again, even though it was not successful. Thank you. Okay, so next thing. You said also with your dissolving district TIF 2, but yet you're really not because TIF 3 is taking it over. So it's actually extending it, correct?
No, so it is taking over the area that is currently in TIF 2. But by dissolving that TIF, the increment that growth has occurred in there, plus all the revenue that TIF has generated, will be distributed back to the tax districts.
But yet it's encompassed in TIF 3.
It's correct. The land will
So
be within.
it's actually extended though, right?
So the increment that has generated to date, the village has not expended funds within that TIF district or significant funds within the TIF district, so the balance that's in there has been since the creation of that TIF. It is not really, that TIF, from a success standpoint, has not been successful. It was a very small defined area. It was designed for development that was presented to the village back in 2006, didn't go forward due to the recession, and that TIF has underperformed.
Okay, so that's TIF 1 and TIF 2 so far have admittedly been unsuccessful. All right, thank you. And next, you said TIF 23 years. Is that the most, like it has to be, or it could be less if you chose?
The village can vote at any time to dissolve a TIF. So as with the case with TIF 2, we can vote to, the village board can vote to dissolve a TIF before that 23-year time period.
But what about like, we actually only wanted 8 years or 5 years, say, or like, is it only 23 years?
23 years is the state statute requirement, so generally is, the TIF statute looks at, from a development standpoint, if you approve a TIF with the development, the first few years are allowed to, for that development to actually take place or to be constructed, so that you would have 20 years approximately of life to capture the new growth that project would have.
Right, I guess I know some TIF districts are 8 years. You couldn't lower the years when you vote on it, if you do or not.
It's a board decision if they would want
Okay.
to
All right.
approve a shorter time.
All right. Okay, and then you had repeatedly said you don't intend to displace residents, but we see what happens, like the senior center is supposed to bid out on one building, and it's now 2 or 3 now. So those residents that are there will eventually be displaced because you now have this looming buildings overlooking these yards. So that is, you're kind of pushing them out. And that's what, so while you may say you don't have that intention, that's what would happen. And the school districts, you said that 40% gets set aside for the new students. I'm sure the school district, I told you, maybe not, but I believe we're at capacity. So even if you gave us money for students, where would we put them if the money for a new school's not provided? You would risk higher class sizes, which our district has fought for best practices, smaller class sizes. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Pete Lovato? Pete? Jim Williams? Phil Stanko? Okay. And Randy Scott?
Hi, gentlemen. Thank you for today. My name is Randy Scott. My wife Meredith and I opened Carrie Dairy Ice Cream Cafe about 2 or 3 years ago now. And I'm not going to go into a whole semantic or want anything else, but I just want to share with you a quick story. My parents moved me here when I was 3 years old. We had a Clark gas station. We had Bead Boss, and we had a Gold Crown Hallmark, of which I bought Beanie Babies at. We had, when they moved me here when I was 3 years old, we had 0 smoke shops, 0 video gaming, 0 pot dispensaries. I find myself going off I don't like to go off like that because it gets us nowhere. What I'm here to, I have the Village of Cary, when I did 10 years of firefighting for the Village of Cary and answered 911 calls, and I loved every minute of it. And I would go back like that. I have a 1-year-old daughter and another one on the way. During that 10 years of firefighting, I would sit in the radio room and look across the street at a smoke shop and watch families ride their bikes by. And during the heart of COVID, I flew everywhere to get equipment to open up Carrie Dairy. And my wife and I worked, I would work overnights, she would work at the Village Squire, and then we would work overnight and during the day, and then I would go back and do another shift at the firehouse. My suggestion to you is that now we all know that we have a lot more video gaming, a lot more smoke shops, and no more Bead Boss, which I miss. I still have my necklace that I made. The Village of Cary is currently suing Carrie Dairy. $750 a day, I received a fine back about a year ago. My one question to you, I have a question and one suggestion. My question to you, are you going to be as welcoming to businesses in this TIF district as you have been to us? When we first opened, you guys threatened litigation about our logo because it had the pump station. I had to hire a patent or a trademark attorney. My suggestion to you is just stay true to why my parents moved us here, because you're not going to have to worry about more students, sir. Thank you for your time.
That's all the individuals that have signed in. Is there anybody else that would like to comment? Lady in the back, sir.
Hi, sorry, I didn't have any time to sign in because I was at work, so I had to miss dinner and saying hi to my family to be here. So I didn't prepare anything, but I just wanted to come up here and thank you for organizing this. I understand how challenging it is to interact with the public, get opinions, and do what you feel is the right thing. Given what everyone has said here tonight, though, I feel like I should say something. I'm probably the youngest parent in this room. I moved here to Cary because it was quaint, it was small, you could access things by foot. And then the majority of the people who made Cary a community are behind me. Anyone from Dr. Coleman to Janae, who was my son's teacher, to Carrie Derry. The plan that's in front of me is not why I moved here. The small things that were done to improve our roads, the crosswalks. I've seen cars crash into the crossing signs. We don't need more traffic. We don't need more access. At 7 a.m. in the morning, taking my kids to school, just crossing the street in front of school in Maine, cars blow through the crossing guard. The speed limit there is below 30 miles an hour. We don't need increased traffic. Recently, I've taken a new position within the state of Illinois, and I work in an assessor's office. I am working to obtain my designation for CAIO. The majority of the things that were discussed at the state conference was seniors, just for the state of Illinois as a whole. In my short time working in an assessor's office, I can't tell you how many seniors have come in thinking it was 2 years ago, and they don't know why they're not getting their senior freeze, their senior exemption. We have a large retired community in Cary. The majority of our seniors who are 65, I don't feel like are being represented in this new plan. The majority of the people who call into my assessor's office are children of seniors, because seniors are no longer able to maintain communication. They're not able to keep up on taxes. They're not able to understand this. And as a young parent, I barely got here. I barely got here to voice my opinion. I barely got here to see what is going on, and I don't fully grasp it still because I don't have the time. So I appreciate the public comment. I appreciate having meetings to discuss this. But what you're trying to attract, which I feel like is, I'm the ideal family, the young family that you want to come in here. We don't have the time to understand this and comment on it, because the majority of younger families aren't even homeowners, they're still renters. I'm lucky to have a home. I'm lucky to live on Krenz. I'm lucky to be surrounded by seniors who know the history, and I'm lucky to have those softball fields, because during COVID, they were the only thing that we had. We couldn't escape the tablet. We couldn't escape work. We couldn't escape ourselves, but we had the softball fields. And I can't tell you how much of a pleasure it is to hear when the sun's going down and you see the fireflies and you have those kids playing softball. I understand the amount of money that's gone into maintaining it, and I know that's a part of the school board, but it's just not the development. That's not why I'm here. That's not why my family's here. It would actually deter me, and it would deter younger families from coming and attracting. So the new students that you're thinking about, I just don't think that you're on the same page as them. And I just wanted to make sure that seniors were represented, because the majority of them are homeless or in the predicament of being homeless. And I think that's just across the state of Illinois currently, the baby boomers. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
Thank you. And sorry, just to reiterate, if you can, just sign in on the sign-in sheet that's on the podium there, so we have a record of who is here.
Okay.
From that standpoint.
My name
Thank
is
you.
Whitey Hirsch. I'm a business owner in town. I own one piece of property at the northwest corner there and half of the parcel next to it. 16 years ago when I built my building, okay, Steve Lamal was the mayor. Steve Lamal come over, I said, this is what I'm looking to do. Steve says to me, he says, you know, this would be a prime piece for redevelopment. And I said, you're not taking my property. This is a precursor, I believe the precursor of the TIF district will end up with you trying to take my property from me. And I honestly believe that. I was at a meeting here a couple of months ago. I gave you guys my opinion then, asked to be deleted from it. You see what happens? Nothing. Whatever you say here, it doesn't matter. They're still gonna do what the hell they want, okay? All those pieces of property over there, you put all those people's houses in limbo. Does somebody wanna buy their house? If it's, well, it's in TIF district, we don't know what's gonna happen, we might move in, somebody might take it away, whatever. You put their property in limbo, and you might say it's gonna make it worth more money, but it's not. I find it hard to believe. I'd like to see the paperwork that excludes the mayor's office from being on here. I could see where they say, well, you can't vote on it. That would make sense. But to exclude him, his piece of property from it, makes absolutely no sense. I'd like to see that paperwork. One other thing, why don't we abolish this whole thing and try to save a life and just fix the intersection of 14 and West Main before somebody gets killed over there? We've had massive accidents over there, and the day is coming, somebody's gonna get killed over there. Why don't we solve that problem before we deal with this?
Just to try to clarify this information about the mayor's property, the mayor does not own property in the TIF. The piece that you're referencing is an office space that he leases. The state statute does not allow the elected officials to be part of the TIF property, and that's why the property is excluded.
So we exclude them from being part of your TIF district, but
It's-
you won't exclude me.
It's not his property. He doesn't
Okay?
own that
So you
property.
exclude his office from being part of it.
He has office space there, yes.
Does that make any sense? Does that make any sense to anybody? It's state law. It still makes no sense.
Force the mayor to move his office, that way we can include it in the TIF district. I think that sounds good. Is there anybody else who'd like to comment as well at the podium? I'll leave it open. Does anybody else want to provide comment this evening?
I'll put my name down in a minute. My name is Paul. Somebody came up here and asked a question that I don't quite think you fully answered, and it somewhat related to Mr. Whitey over here, in the sense that if I owned, which I don't, but if I owned a business downtown Cary and a developer wanted to come and do something different to the business that I own, and they approach me and they say, hey, can I buy your building? And I say, no, you can't buy my building. And they approach me a couple of times, can I buy your building? And I say no every single time. Am I going to be forced at some point, if it falls within the downtown strategic plan, am I going to be forced to sell my building because of a strategic direction that the village or somebody else wants to go in? I think one of the main concerns here tonight is either being forced to sell or property being taken. And that's very scary, and that has to be understood and respected. And people get very angry, especially those that have been here for quite a long time, 20, 30, 40 years. Whether you're a homeowner or you're a business owner that has been here and has contributed and built this village. I've been here over 20 years. And even though I'm not in that position, I can completely sympathize with their fears and what they're going through. So if you can answer that question very directly, that would be most appreciated.
What's the question?
Would
No,
I
I understand what
would I be forced?
what your concern is. What's the question?
Would I be forced to sell my building if I say no, but it falls within the strategic downtown plan?
If you're asking, I understand the concern. If you're asking whether the village, school district, whether public bodies generally have the ability to use eminent domain to acquire property, they do. The village does, so do other public bodies. Are
But
there any
does-
plans that are changed by this TIF?
Yeah.
Not currently, to take any, for the village to take any property.
I'm not suggesting the village taking the property. What I'm suggesting is, would I be forced to sell? And if that's what you call eminent domain, does a TIF district have to exist first before eminent domain is put in place? No, I didn't think so. So would I be forced to sell somehow, some way, to that developer if they really, really, really wanted to do something to a piece of property in downtown Cary?
I can only answer that by saying that exists, that issue, that the village has the power of eminent domain, as other public bodies do in Illinois, is an individual decision relative to a piece of property. It doesn't have anything specifically to do with the TIF. It only has to do with village planning.
Okay.
So there are no current, I can tell you, you may want to add something as well, Eric, there are no current plans that the village has to acquire by eminent domain any property in the village.
So
Yeah,
that
exactly.
developer couldn't go to the village and say, hey, Paul won't sell me his property, can you guys go do something about that?
That is not on the table.
That is not in the plans of the village at this
I
point.
know it's not in the plan, but as development happens,
Well, right, so.
plans change.
So as we move forward, one of the purposes of this evening, and even before tonight, the draft plan, draft redevelopment plan, and redevelopment concepts have been posted on the village's website and are publicly available and have been for about a month, I think. The idea is that you do have access to the information related to the plan. There is nothing in the plan, as developed by the professional TIF consultants for the village, or as suggested by the village, that targets any property within this TIF area for condemnation in order to promote a project.
Okay, thank you.
And adding to that, obviously, the plans that we mentioned, that is the vision of the community, that is the common goal of our board and of our village. We've heard a lot of comments today and tonight about wanting to ensure that what makes Cary great stays. That is a shared vision. This TIF district is, but a tool in trying to accomplish those visions. There's a lot of talk about very specific projects, but this is, again, a tool to give the village and give the community the opportunity to move forward with what improvements might best suit the village. As was mentioned earlier, each project, each request for the TIF funding does take separate approvals, and there's separate public input associated with that, sometimes public hearings, public feedback with regards to any entitlement processes and zoning. So there is still a lot of opportunity, and I appreciate the thought of the uncertainty of what's out there, but it is that uncertainty that creates the opportunity. And that's what this tool is about. So again, I really thank the community and all the comments, particularly the ones that share our board's vision about making Cary great and keeping in tune with what has made it great in the past and honoring that. I will say that is part of the vision that's outlined in our community's comprehensive plan, our strategic plans, and we have not lost sight of that.
Is there anybody else who'd like to address or speak this evening? Second call, last call?
You're buying.
All right, well, with that, I will close the public meeting or public comment portion of the meeting. So I do want to thank everybody that came out this evening. We do appreciate the feedback, the comments that you've provided. Again, we have recorded this meeting. We also will be drafting minutes and we'll provide information to our village board. As this process moves forward, there will be additional opportunities for public participation throughout the process. So the next steps will be to, at our village board, as we mentioned, they will determine the determination to go forward with calling the JRB for review of the proposed TIF district. And then that eventually would have a recommendation that would come out of the JRB to the village board for a separate public hearing in July time period. So there will be additional opportunities for the public to participate in the process here. The feedback we appreciate that you provided this evening, and that will be forwarded to the board so they are aware of concerns that were expressed this evening. So again, I do thank you for the time coming out this evening. If you do have any questions, we will have additional information that will be put on our website to kind of respond to some concerns that were come up this evening, kind of frequently asked questions. So if you have additional concerns, you can always go on our website to find that information, or contact the Village Hall directly as well. I'll be happy to talk to each and every one of you on an individual basis to address any concerns you may have. So with that, we'll close the public meeting this evening, but I do, again, thank you for coming out and appreciate your time.